In the quiet town of Correggio, Italy, where olive trees sway and the air smells of warm bread, there once lived a woman who smiled too easily and baked cakes that no one dared ask about. She was a fortune teller, a mother, a neighbor with soft hands, and an endless supply of sweet almond soap. But what no one knew, what no one could have known, was that this woman was feeding the town something far darker than tea and sympathy. Because within her kitchen walls, behind curtains stitched with rosary lace, Leonarda Cianciulli had begun a ritual, not of prayer, but of blood. And by the time they found out what she'd done, it was already too late. Some had eaten the cakes, others had bathed in the soap, and everyone, in some way, had touched the dead. In the cobbled heart of Correggio, a sleepy Italian village swallowed by superstition and slow Sundays, the scent of soap was as ordinary as the church bells. It drifted through alleyways, clung to drying linens, filled the courtyards after morning wash. But in the spring of 1940, it changed. Not all at once. Gradually, like rot beneath the floorboards. It came from a narrow house with green shutters and chipped brick, tucked between the apothecary and the bakery. The woman who lived there, Leonarda Cianciulli, was no stranger to the town. Most knew her by name. Some feared her. Others pitied her. She sold homemade soap and red palms for women with aching hearts. She wore black even on sunny days and moved with the heavy grace of someone carrying far more than her own weight. She spoke softly, smiled often, but behind that smile was something unreadable. Not cruel, not kind, just distant. At first, the scent was easy to explain. The old lye vats, they said. Maybe spoiled fat. The air was warming up. But as the days stretched into May, it deepened. It clung to windowsills and fingernails. Sweet, but sickening. Like almonds steeped in old meat. The baker next door swore it was just bad soap. The apothecary wasn't so sure. Some began to avoid her entirely. Children crossed the street. Cats hissed at her door. A dog once barked until it choked on its own throat. Still, no one knocked. Not yet. They remembered what happened to Leonarda. The deaths, the curses, the babies she buried. So they stayed silent, and the stench grew legs. It wasn't until Faustina Setti vanished that anyone spoke her name again, and even then, only in murmurs. Faustina was older, unmarried, hopeful in the way that makes a person dangerous to themselves. She'd been visiting Leonarda for months. Palm readings, tea, little whispers about love and husbands, and a man in Pola who was waiting for her. Then, one Sunday, she packed a suitcase and left no forwarding address. She told a friend she was headed to meet her new fiancé, that Leonarda had arranged it, that it was secret. She never arrived. Leonarda told police Faustina had left town, eloped probably. She even showed them a letter written in Faustina's own hand, confirming it. She said Faustina had asked her to send it. The officer barely looked at it. Women left Correggio all the time. And Leonarda? She was just a mother, a fortune teller, a soap maker. Odd, yes, but harmless, wasn't she? Still, something lingered. Something in the way she smiled when asked. Too smooth, too quick. And the smell, it hadn't faded. It had thickened. By July, it oozed from under the door like steam. The butcher's wife, who passed Leonarda's house daily, swore she saw a red stain on the steps one morning. It had been scrubbed away by afternoon. Another neighbor claimed they saw steam from the chimney late at night, long after the rest of the town had gone still. But again, no one knocked. Because when people looked at Leonarda Cianciulli, they didn't see a murderer. They saw a woman crushed by grief, a mother who had lost child after child, who'd fled earthquakes and poverty and something darker. They saw a woman who had suffered, and everyone in Correggio understood suffering. They didn't know that behind that locked kitchen door, beneath the hiss of boiling water and the soft clink of enamel against bone, something far worse was cooking. They didn't know that soap could sing, that it could scream, that it could bleed. They didn't know that in the center of that narrow house, under flickering oil light, Leonarda stirred something thicker than water, with a butcher's blade beside her and a recipe that wasn't written in any book. And still, no one knocked. Not yet. Before she ever carved into flesh or stirred a pot of lye-thickened blood, Leonarda Cianciulli was already surrounded by death. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. She was born in 1894 in the southern hills of Montella, and from the very beginning, she was unwanted. Her mother Amelia never forgave her for being born of rape. Leonarda was the child of shame, a living scar across her mother's pride. There was no affection, no lullabies, no warmth, only cold hands and colder stares. And if you ask the women of Montella, they'd tell you this: a mother's hatred is a curse that doesn't end with words, it seeps into the bones. Leonarda would later claim her mother cursed her outright, that the very day she married Raffaele Pansardi, a registry clerk and not the wealthy suitor her mother had chosen, Amelia spit on the ground and whispered a curse so old and so cruel it made the windows rattle. "I hope the earth takes everything you ever love," she said. And the earth obliged. By her early 30s, Leonarda had lost more than most townspeople lost in a lifetime. 3 miscarriages, 10 children born and buried before their 5th birthdays, 13 small graves. She would visit them often, candles in her bag, little prayers stitched between sobs. She'd leave flowers even in the dead of winter. Neighbors began avoiding her. Whispers circled. "She's marked," they'd say. "She's cursed." Leonarda didn't disagree. She sought answers in places the church couldn't reach. Fortune tellers, palm readers, ritual workers. In one unforgettable visit, a Romani woman read her hand and went pale. "In your right palm," she said, "I see prison. In your left, a criminal asylum." Leonarda laughed at first. Then she cried. Then she started preparing. After the 13th grave, something inside her broke. No, not broke, changed. She stopped seeing death as a thief. She started seeing it as a currency. And like any desperate mother, she began to bargain. She and Raffaele moved north to Correggio, hoping the change of air would lift the fog around them. There, in a house too small for her pain, she finally gave birth to 4 living children. One of them, Giuseppe, became her anchor, her obsession, her redemption. He was soft-spoken, bright. He liked music, books, and long walks near the olive groves. She watched him like a relic, fed him first, spoke of him with religious awe. "If God takes this one," she whispered once to her neighbor, "I'll take something back from him." By the time World War II began rumbling across Italy's borders, Giuseppe had grown into a young man eager to serve his country, oblivious to the storm inside his mother's eyes. He wanted to enlist. She wanted to protect. But how do you protect someone from a war when even God has stolen from you? Leonarda found her answer in blood magic, in offering, in equation. One life for another. A simple trade. It made sense in the darkest corners of her mind. But you don't find sacrificial lambs in broad daylight. You lure them. You light candles. You smile kindly. You offer tea. And when they lean in close, you raise the axe. They said Faustina Setti was a lonely woman, and that much was true. 58 years old, unmarried, childless, and fading fast into that tight, merciless space between being ignored and being pitied. She rented a small room near the edge of Correggio. Her life had long narrowed to habits, walking to the market, sipping bitter coffee, whispering rosaries no one else heard. But she wanted love still, even as the world laughed at the idea, even as her body aged and her reflection turned foreign. So when Leonarda Cianciulli told her about a man, a kind, middle-aged bachelor in Pola, who needed a wife to help manage his home and vineyards, Faustina leaned in. She didn't ask how Leonarda knew this man. She didn't ask why the proposal had to stay secret. She only heard the word husband. And Leonarda? Leonarda smiled the way only someone truly devout could smile. She even offered to write love letters on Faustina's behalf. Dictated. Of course, Faustina's handwriting was terrible, and Leonarda's script was so neat, so perfect. 3 letters were penned in total, all signed with Faustina's name. Each one a breadcrumb meant for the authorities, each one part of the ritual. Leonarda told Faustina the man was ready to receive her, that the journey would begin soon, and that it must remain entirely private.
No good spell works when too many eyes are on it.
she whispered over tea. On the morning of September 5th, 1940, Faustina packed her suitcase. Inside were her best clothes, a rosary, and a small sum of money she had withdrawn from the bank, just as Leonarda had instructed. She walked to Leonarda's house first, as planned, just for tea, just to say goodbye. The door creaked open. The air inside was damp and warm. Soap boiled in a pot. A blade glinted quietly in the sink. Faustina stepped in, and the town never saw her again. No one heard the scream. No one heard the thud of metal on skull. Only Leonarda, standing above the crumpled woman, blood trailing in loops across the tile like a broken rosary. She worked quickly, first the axe, then the basin. She dragged the body with the ease of someone possessed, not with rage, not with panic, but with purpose. A butcher's rhythm, a priestess's calm. She drained the blood carefully, collecting it in a copper bowl. Later, it would be mixed with flour, sugar, and eggs. She would serve it as cakes to her neighbors, who would smile politely and ask for the recipe. She would lie. Of course, as for the flesh, that went into the cauldron. Boiling water, caustic soda, thyme. The fat rose like cream, thick and glistening. She skimmed it with a ladle, set it aside to cool, then shaped it into little bars. Soap, with the scent of lavender and death. And the bones? Crushed, burned, swept into a bucket like wood ash. By dusk, Faustina Setti no longer existed. Only her suitcase remained, and a trail of almond-sweet air that floated through Correggio like an omen. 3 days later, Leonarda gave the first of the letters to the police. It was signed, addressed, and full of plausible lies. Faustina had found love, it said. She was happy, safe, starting a new life in Pola. The officer didn't even file a report. Case closed before it had ever opened. But Leonarda wasn't finished, because Giuseppe still hadn't been called to war. And one life wasn't enough. One sacrifice doesn't buy certainty. One bar of soap doesn't wash away the fear. She needed another. Someone quieter. Someone forgettable. Someone she could boil down to peace. She didn't wait long. Barely had the scent of Faustina's blood faded from the kitchen tiles before Leonarda heard another knock at her door. A woman's voice, hopeful, trusting, the sound of prey dressed in politeness. Francesca Suavi was a school teacher, tired of grading papers and living with her aging father. She wanted escape, freedom, purpose. Leonarda, now practiced in the art of predation, offered her all three. "There's a headmistress position in Piacenza," she told her, leaning in close as if sharing a sacred truth. "Room and board, books, children who need you. But discretion is everything." Francesca, intrigued and flattered, returned several times over the next few weeks. Each visit felt warmer. Leonarda made her tea, gently encouraged her to write farewell letters, and guided her in secrecy. "Don't tell anyone," she warned. "They'll ruin the chance with their doubts." Francesca obeyed. On the morning of September 5th, 1940, exactly 1 year after Faustina's disappearance, Francesca packed a small bag, walked to Leonarda's door, and stepped inside. The door closed behind her, and history repeated itself. A swing, a scream, silence. By now, Leonarda was fast. She had refined the process like any ritual perfected through repetition. She bled the body, caught the liquid in her polished copper bowl, and reached for the flour. Blood makes the cakes rise better, she noticed. Sweeter, somehow. More filling. She poured the blood into a batter, stirred with expert hands, and placed the pan into the oven. Outside, the town buzzed with news and rationing updates. Inside, Francesca Suavi baked quietly in pieces. Leonarda rendered her fat in the cauldron. The soap was smoother this time, more pliable. She formed it into small decorative bars and wrapped them in brown paper. She placed them near the door, gifts for visitors. No one questioned them. It's soap, after all. And soap, in wartime Italy, was hard to come by. But again, it wasn't enough. Her son Giuseppe had not yet been called to serve. And now, Leonarda was desperate. 3 was the number. 3 had always been the number. 3 sacrifices would guarantee safety. 3 lives for 1 beloved son. That was the math of her madness. It made sense. In its own deranged symmetry, her third and final victim was different. Louder. Proud. A former soprano. Her name was Virginia Cacioppo. She had once sung in La Scala, Milan's most revered opera house. Though age had bent her back and softened her voice, she still carried herself with a performer's poise. But time had not been kind. Money was tight. The war had dried up opportunities, and even the admiration she once commanded now curdled into pity. Leonarda told her about a position with a wealthy theater director in Florence, one who needed a companion, someone cultured and poised. Virginia's pride swelled. She agreed instantly. The letters came next. 3, just like before. Written by Leonarda, signed by Virginia. And on September 30th, 1940, she too arrived at the little house on the quiet street in Correggio. She never left. Later, Leonarda would describe Virginia's dismemberment with the same casual tone one might use for a cake recipe. She ended up in the pot like the others, she told police. Her flesh was fat and white, but this time, the soap was richer. The fat rendered beautifully. And the tea cakes? Oh, she whispered, they were delicious. Yes, she ate them, and so did her neighbors, and her friends, and her children. No one suspected. Not even Giuseppe. After the third murder, Leonarda felt peace. Giuseppe, finally, was called to the front. She wept, but with pride. The ritual had worked. She had paid the price. Or so she believed. But fate, like soap, has a way of slipping, because Virginia Cacioppo had a sister, and that sister didn't buy the story of sudden romance and new employment in Florence. She called the police, filed a complaint, pressed and pressed. And when the police came knocking, they found Leonarda unshaken. She invited them in. She offered them tea. She smiled politely, until they mentioned Virginia's name, and the letters, and the smell. And just like that, the blade dulled. The ritual cracked. The final bar of soap would not be wrapped, because soon the town would know. The complaint filed by Virginia Cacioppo's sister began as a whisper. A quiet visit to a weary carabinieri officer in a province that rarely made headlines. But there was something in her eyes, a fury sharpened by grief. She insisted Virginia was not the kind of woman to vanish, that her letters read like dictation, that she never said goodbye in person. And then she said the name, Leonarda Cianciulli, a name spoken with caution, a woman known for her charms, her tea, her strange airs. A fortune teller who spoke softly and knew things no one should know. Investigators arrived at her home within days. They were not prepared for what they found. At first, Leonarda greeted them with her usual unsettling calm. She smiled, offered them coffee, even gestured at the neat rows of soap bars stacked near the kitchen. But when they asked about Virginia, her face shifted. Not with fear, not with guilt, but with something else entirely. A kind of relief, as though confession were not a burden, but a sacrament, a release. Yes, she said, I killed her, just like that. 3 words, cold, clean, delivered like a woman discussing weather. She told them everything. How Faustina Setti was the first. How she drugged her wine, struck her with an axe, bled her out. How she boiled her flesh, rendered her fat, and used her blood for cake batter. How Francesca Suavi followed a teacher with dreams, deceived with false letters, slaughtered and reduced to soap and flour. And finally, how Virginia Cacioppo, opera singer, elder sister, war widow, was the final offering. The one whose death had, at last, guaranteed her son Giuseppe's safety. Her voice, they noted, never trembled. She did not plead for mercy. She did not even express regret. Instead, she seemed proud. As though the murders were not crimes but acts of maternal devotion. I gave them swift deaths, she said, and I gave my son life. To her, the trade had been fair, but investigators were not prepared for the physical evidence she so casually revealed. The basin in the corner still smelled of iron and rot. The stove, scrubbed but scarred, had clearly been used for something unnatural. And then there were the bars of soap, smooth, pale, and shaped by hand. Dozens of them. Wrapped, labeled, waiting. And the tea cakes, too. A tray sat on the counter, just slightly warm, almond, faintly sweet. One of the officers reached out instinctively. then stopped. The air seemed heavier now. When asked why, Leonarda leaned forward. "You do not understand," she whispered. "The spirits demanded balance. You cannot take without giving. A life is not free. I read the signs. I followed the rituals. I kept him safe." It was true. Her son Giuseppe had not been harmed at the front. He returned home days later, confused, frightened, and completely unaware of the horrors his mother had committed in his name. He never ate the cakes. That, perhaps, was his only blessing. The news broke in early October 1940, and Correggio erupted. Neighbors recoiled in disbelief. Women wept. Children stared at their hands, remembering the sweet soap they'd used to wash for dinner. 3 women, all known, all local, gone, melted down, rendered, in a house they had all visited by a woman they had trusted, a friend, a mother, a witch. The trial, by then, was inevitable. But what no one expected was how unapologetic Leonarda remained. "I would do it again," she said in court. 100 times, if it meant saving my son. She gave detailed descriptions of each murder, often unprompted. Even joked with the judge. "Did you truly make soap?" someone asked. She smiled. "I gave them a better use in death than they ever had in life." Her defense tried to argue insanity, but even that fell apart. Psychiatrists observed her for months. They concluded that she was mentally competent, cold, calculating, obsessively superstitious, but not mad. She believed in her rituals, but she knew they were illegal, and that made all the difference. In 1946, 6 years after the murders, Leonarda Cianciulli was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum, a poetic twist she herself had predicted years earlier in a palm reading. "Prison until death," she said once, long before her arrest. And a room padded in white. And so it came to pass. She died in 1970, in the asylum, old, unrepentant, still certain that she had made the correct choice. But her story, her legacy, it never died. To this day, the people of Correggio speak her name in low voices. And though the house has been long torn down, some swear that in the right wind, you can still smell sweet almonds and lye curling through the air. And sometimes, just sometimes, an old soap bar turns up at a flea market, smooth, pale, wrapped in brown paper, and no one ever buys it.